It's Sunday, November 2, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the weekend show where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is one of America's sharpest observers of politics and culture. He is the author of several essential books, including American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People, and The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. Jared Yates Sexton, welcome back to the weekend show.
Anthony, my friend, always good to talk to you. As always, wish you was under better circumstances.
Absolutely. No, I actually want to start with some good news, and that is that two federal judges issued back-to-back rulings on Friday in separate cases, ordering the Trump regime to use contingency funds to continue paying for food stamps, these SNAP benefits, taking the power away from the authoritarian momentarily. Is this a sign, just to start with, that the courts are holding, considering that we are under this kind of fascist coup from the inside?
Well, I want to say, first of all, the SNAP situation, for me, it's infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating that we've gotten to this point where 42 million people, not to mention how many people around them, how many communities would suffer from this type of behavior from a federal government, which doesn't want to help them. They have emergency funds. They're not willing to use them. On top of that, they've shut down the government for their own purposes. They literally want to destroy the federal government for any reason besides being a redistributive machine to the wealth class. That's the entire purpose of it, and self-enrichment, of course. But when it comes to the courts, Anthony, I keep seeing these things happen, that the Trump administration will do something obviously illegal, immoral, and corrupt. And the courts will step up and will, issue some sort of an injunction or some sort of a ruling. For me, I saw this and for a moment I said, okay, maybe I believe it's $5.5 billion in terms of emergency funds might be let loose here. It takes over $9 billion each month for SNAP to be operated. So we're talking about a little over roughly half of the funds. I still don't have faith that the Trump administration will go along with the ruling, because one of the things that we've been seeing over the course of these months is a increasing willingness to go against the courts. And of course, the Supreme Court has more or less basically said that no other judiciary matters at this point. So this moves us even closer to, once more, another constitutional crisis on top of, I don't know, Anthony, I've lost count, probably a dozen constitutional crises that are happening at the same time. So at this point, I'm hopeful. And I'm hopeful not for political reasons. I'm hopeful for human reasons. I hope at the very, very least that in some way, shape, or form, some of these funds will be released. But I will say on a hopeful note, because in the midst of talking about all of this, I am hopeful because I'm seeing people show up to try and make up the shortfall. I am seeing more people talk about donating to food pantries and animal shelters and women's shelters. And one thing that I've seen, I come from a very, very poor background. And even among working class people, there has been a consistent and nagging sort of stereotype of people who need assistance, that they're takers or that they're lazy or they're trying to cheat the system. I have noticed a change in the way that people are talking about this. And that is a massive, massive sea change. And it's the only thing that's going to get us out of this mess, is if we stop looking at it through the lens of the past and this sort of like winner takes all, game theory, sociopathic worldview. So I am hopeful on that front. When it comes to the judiciary, like a lot of people, it's just a wait and see situation about whether or not these types of rulings actually are enforced or not.
And this is why Trump wants everything to go to the Supreme Court, because he knows they've got his back. And to all intents and purposes, they have.
Yeah, and I like to talk about the Supreme Court through a couple of different lenses. One is that this is an illegitimate court. This is a stolen court. Everybody knows that. It's been bought and sold by the wealth class, which actually literally owns financially multiple members of the court. And then on top of that, I like to remind people of something, which is that the Supreme Court in general is built for this. What this Supreme Court is doing is exactly what the Supreme Court was designed to do in the first place. So when I start talking about that, we're already living basically in a post-liberal world. We're watching liberal democracy being destroyed. I don't know what you're supposed to do when one side won't play by the rules that have been set out. And at that point, I look at the Supreme Court, and instead of talking about packing it or whatever, I want massive, massive change of the Supreme Court. And I think it's time to start thinking about some radical ideas to change it, because what has been exposed is that this court is working the way that it's supposed to. And the Trump administration recognizes who they are, what they do, and why they do the things they do. So whenever I sort of talk about the Supreme Court, I like to approach it from a couple of different angles.
I want to explain, or try to explain, that these conversations now, as we are under this Trump dictatorship, it's not really about left and right anymore. It's not about, we're not saying this stuff because we are Democrats. And I'm certainly not. I don't know how you vote, but I don't vote. I can't vote. But more importantly, I don't even feel represented. My views don't particularly feel represented in the US. But that's because, I advocate for the kind of things that I grew up with, which was universal health care and a social safety net, a welfare state. And those things don't exist here in any shape or form. But there is this desire in commentary and in society to compartmentalize. You're either on the left or you're on the right. And it's become very volatile, especially since the killing of Charlie Kirk. There is the temperature has risen significantly in that area. But I would ask you, is this really about left and right? Because it seems now that this is a fight between good and evil and rich and poor, maybe.
I'm so glad that you framed it that way, because one of the things that has happened in this country, having a duopolistic system, and you come from Europe where duopolistic systems simply don't exist. You have a lot of different options and you create coalition governments, which makes sure that people are represented. There is actually a complete veneer, a fiction that has been created in this country, that everything is red and blue and that there's almost like a 45-45 divide and then there's 10% in the middle. When in fact, if you look at the opinion polls, Anthony, there is a broad consensus on what people want in this country. And the broad consensus is on the issues that are supposedly the most contentious, the flashpoint issues. But there's a broad consensus between 60 and 80% on the most controversial issues in this country. It just so happens that the representation that we have from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party is limited by the wealth class, which effectively bankrolls both parties where the allegiance is in both. What you're talking about, the difference between good and evil, is the difference between moralistic legislation and actions and terror and abuse. Like whether or not somebody deserves a right to safety and privacy and the ability to make something for themselves, that's not actually a political issue. And they've made it a political issue on everything from like gay rights, trans rights, minority rights, women's rights. Nobody actually feels like this is something that's up for debate. It's a manufactured conversation and a manufactured controversy. And it happens, quite frankly, for people who aren't aware, by a constellation of think tanks and institutions that are bankrolled by the wealthiest Americans that create controversies. Like, for instance, it's trans people in sports. Nobody actually cares about this. It's a non-issue. And even if you want to debate about whether or not trans people should be able to compete in certain sports, that is such a small slice of the electorate. But when you actually get down to the numbers, what we're talking about is a group of people, a very, very small group of people who are unwell, they are abusive, they are fascistic, and they are determined to destroy the country for their own personal profit and empowerment. Everyone else at this point, the vast majority of Americans say that this is not okay. The problem is the duopolistic environment doesn't represent that. And in fact, what we've seen over the past few months following the 2024 election, and even before then, is that the Democratic Party is continuing to say, oh, we need to move towards the right. We need to move away from representing these people, and that's why we've lost elections. They have actually even, and I don't know if you've seen this or the people who are watching have seen this, every strategy document, every meeting, every postmortem from the election, it talks about the groups. Who are the groups, Anthony? It's the base of the Democratic Party. And so the party is actually saying we need to move away from what the people want. We need to do what we think we need to do. So we have a difference in representation at this point, but it does not reflect the political reality, which is one of the reasons why people are so frustrated right now and why they're coming together and saying something needs to change.
I heard Kamala Harris being interviewed by the BBC a few days ago, and she was so grateful to her team. She kept talking about her team. And, you know, arguably it was her team that kind of made some really quite terrible decisions during that campaign. And, you know, I'm a fan of Kamala Harris. I think she would have made a great president. And there's talk that she may want to run again. But it does seem that the terms that she would run again on are out of date now. Things have moved so fast. And running a campaign in 2028 cannot look anything like the one that was run in 2024. Do you think that the Democratic Party, which currently is seeing this leadership vacuum, would be wise to kind of wake up to, say, Zohran Mamdani and actually lean in to the left-leaning politics, to wokeism as described by Republicans, and actually just really go for it?
Oh, I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the numbers show us exactly what's happening here. But there's a problem, Anthony. The team that you brought up. And by the way, for anyone who hasn't, I think one of the most revealing documents or artifacts that you can find, there was a Pod Save America interview with the Kamala Harris leadership team immediately.
I was about to bring this up. I know exactly where you're going with this.
Literally, I don't keep watching this show. Don't turn this show off.
It was excruciating for lots of reasons.
If you haven't seen it yet, please go watch it because it's a Rosetta Stone of what's actually happening within the Democratic Party. And here's the thing that doesn't get discussed because the corporate media is basically on the same page about this. Mm-hmm. Everybody who runs the Democratic campaigns, and I'm talking everything from Kamala Harris all the way down, they don't run campaigns every day of their lives, Anthony. They run it every 2 years or, you know, in those sort of things. Where do they go work when they're not running these campaigns? They go work for corporations. And those are the people who actually pay them the most. So nobody who runs a Democratic Party campaign right now is going to want to run a campaign like a Zohran Mamdani, because the people who are donating money against Zohran Mamdani are the people who run the corporations that donate to the Democratic Party and pay the operatives when they're not running campaigns. It's an incredible relationship that they can carry out, and it's been happening for decades now. So when it really comes down to it, they're not running campaigns always to win them. Of course, if you win them, fantastic. You become a legend in the Democratic Party because they barely ever win any elections. But if you run it in such a way that you don't spook the people who will be paying you in the off season, those checks are still going to be coming around. And so there is an allegiance between the Democratic infrastructure, the status quo, whatever you want to call them. They are much more worried about keeping those donations coming in, which is what keeps Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and used to be Nancy Pelosi in charge of the party. They are much more worried about maintaining that financial base and power base as opposed to doing what is obviously popular and what people obviously desire. This is the reason that the Mamdani thing has gone the way that it is, because he freaks out the wealth class.
Yeah.
And if you go out and actually diagnose what's going on, I just want to add one extra point on here. You said it's not left and right. I want people to notice something. The Republican Party, the fascist, the authoritarians, I want people to notice they're on the left and the right of most issues. They straddle it. And there is a reason, just to bring in a historical context, why the Nazis, their full name was the National Socialist.
Right.
Is because fascists go ahead and answer the vacuum of leftist politics by doing both things at once and leading people who want leftist politics into right-wing reactionary politics. And so that vacuum right now, it keeps the Democratic Party hedged in and unable to actually speak to the things that people want them to speak for. And it's an untenable situation, and it's why you end up in these cycles that we currently have.
The same thing goes for the media, and you and I have experience of this. You know, I used to work for the networks for 20 years, all the networks right across the world, based in London. And the decoupling of that and moving into the independent media space, which interestingly a lot of current anchors are doing and finding new homes in independent media on their own, on Substack and YouTube and elsewhere. And you've done the same with universities. You uncouple from the establishment, and suddenly, by crowdfunding your salary, you're actually asking people who genuinely need what it is that you have to offer to be part of the community and the movement. And that is how politics ideally would work. But because the US has these huge budgets, the funding that needs to be done to run campaigns, it's always been thought that, well, that money has to come from corporate entities and wealthy benefactors. But actually what Mamdani has done is prove that crowdfunding from the people is the solution to that. And you and I are also testament to it, that now we make our living for the people, with the people.
Well, and Anthony, there's a reason why hundreds of thousands of people are watching this conversation. And by the way, those ratings, I'll pull back the curtain. I hope this is comfortable. That's more people than are watching CNN.
Right.
It actually is. One of the wildest things for me, I do a podcast, the Muckrake Podcast. And I don't know if you remember this, but CNN rolled out their streaming app. And one day I was talking with my co-host, Nick Hauselman, and we were like, how do we have more subscribers than CNN's streaming? Yeah. Right? And the answer is that it's a walking zombie. No one watches corporate media anymore because everyone understands that it's a wealth class owned game.
Right.
And the entire point of it isn't to get ratings. This is the wild thing that I don't think people understand at this point. The people who are watching CNN or MSNBC or now CBS News, whatever it is, it's the political class. It's the wealth class. It's basically there to tell them what they want to hear. There's a reason why something like Morning Joe, which is an absurd offense to anybody who pays attention to anything, that it was the show that someone like a Joe Biden watched, or the Democratic leadership. And it was because it was more or less, it reminds me a lot of the feudal idea of the jester. They were there to do the dance for the people who had the money and to, sort of keep them entertained. And what we're finding now is that independent media, I used to go on the shows. And do you know when those, and I used to write op-eds for the New York Times. Do you know when I stopped getting invited to do that, Anthony? When I started talking about capitalism. When all of a sudden my critique and my analysis changed towards the incentives of a capitalist system, all of a sudden my phone didn't ring anymore.
Right.
And the reason is because we all know this system doesn't work. We all know this thing is rigged. But what is happening at this point, at this inflection point? Fascism is a necessity of capitalism. Eventually, at some point, it loses its democratic appeal, right? It loses the appeal of people because they look around and they say, this doesn't work for me. So an authoritarian has to come in to enforce discipline and to oppress people to make sure that the consolidation of wealth and resources will continue. It's not a coincidence that every corporate-owned media is moving towards the right. They sane-watched Donald Trump. They normalized Donald Trump. On top of that, they've got Curtis Yarvin coming on. Barry Weiss just took over CBS. All of this is about keeping this message and sort of normalizing this more authoritarian movement. And the reason independent media is thriving is because people are saying, I don't want this, I don't believe in it, and I'm not going to participate anymore. It is the democratization of actual news and journalism. And what you just brought up is important because the Democratic Party takes its base for granted. Because what are you going to do? You're going to go vote for Josh Hawley? You're going to go vote for Ted Cruz? You're going to vote for Donald Trump? Of course you're not. And if you read the internal documents of the Democratic Party, they know that people are going to continue to show up and donate. And which is one of the reasons why I tell people, stop giving your money to the Democratic Party. They have enough money. Give it to the people in your community. Give it to organizations that actually represent you. And maybe over time that will start to send the message that somebody like a Zohran Mamdani, and by the way, Kamala Harris, the reason she had $1 billion in money wasn't just corporations. It was because people gave to her.
Right.
We have the economic leverage and we have the power and we have to assert that. Otherwise, things are just going to continue down the same road that they're on.
If this conversation was on CNN, Jared, there would be 12 little boxes with 12 different voices, all being given the opportunity to say half a sentence each, and the show would be 12 minutes long. And yet you and I can sit here for over an hour and allow each other to speak at a level of political discourse that we do not hear in corporate media. And in fact, one of the most familiar comments that you and I get on our shows is, why is this not on TV? And why don't you have these types of conversations on the networks? Let's just talk about where we're at the moment, because we're in the middle of a government shutdown as we speak. Halloween was obviously a huge celebration for a lot of people, a chance to shake off the stresses of modern life and climb under a bed sheet and be a ghost for a few hours. Whilst that was happening, though, I mean, that's a budget Halloween costume, isn't it? Donald Trump was celebrating in a Great Gatsby-style party in his kind of opulent surroundings. This separation between the rich and the poor is becoming more and more exposed, and nothing more kind of shows that than the demolition of the East Wing of the White House and Trump's plans for a ballroom. I mean, who goes to balls these days? It's like, this is a metaphor, isn't it, for what is happening to the country, how the kind of oligarchical leadership needs a palace whilst everybody else is looking for scraps.
Well, and I want to lay my cards on the table, because I'm a natural contrarian. This is my job. It's what I do. Like, I don't have the reverence for the White House that most people do. It was a building that was constructed by enslaved people, and some of the worst things that have ever happened in the history of the world have originated from that building. So when the East Wing got destroyed, I looked at it, Anthony, and where it resonated with me is, what a perfect metaphor. I think at last estimates, we're talking about $300 million, and that's Trump's $300 million, right? Which means it's probably closer to $500 or $600 million.
And he won't pay the contractors either. So
we're talking about probably over $500 million for an opulence project, a vanity project. Meanwhile, he's talking about building an arch that he wants to put in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, his troops are running around, brutalizing people and kidnapping people. On top of that, a thing that's rarely talked about, he's literally going to rob the Treasury of probably $230 million from the Department of Justice. You look at the private planes that are being bought for these people, the sort of trips that they're taking. We'll never know how much he has enriched himself through crypto and bribes from other countries. We don't know. I look at this and I think, what an absolutely perfect metaphor for the United States of America in 2025. And I want to say, and there's a lot to grieve here, and there's a lot to be angry about. We should be happy about one thing, Anthony. We should be grateful. We should be grateful that in the midst of this fascist plundering of the United States of America, that we have someone as transparent as Donald Trump. And I don't mean that he does things in the open. I mean that he can't help but hide his venalness. Right. Yeah. He can't help but hide his self-serving, self-seeking behavior. And I think by seeing that, even the most ardent supporters, they have to at least wrestle with the cognitive dissonance of it, which is, America's standard of living is declining. Things are getting harder in this country. The social safety net is being destroyed. And meanwhile, we have the most gilded Versailles-type president. And not even good Versailles. We're talking about discount Versailles. You know what I mean? Like, really just egregious, disgusting architecture and
it's a Dollar Tree palace, but he even showed a photograph of the Lincoln bathroom that he's just renovated as well. And I mean, that thing, he claimed that it might even be the original marble that was used. I mean, these sentences don't make any sense. And it looks like it's straight out of a Marriott hotel.
It looks like it's off a bad Zillow page, is what it looks like. And you know what it actually looked like to me? It was funny. I a few years ago, like I was like, like a lot of people, you're on Zillow and you're looking at all these pictures. And you look at a house and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this was one of those flipping houses.
Right.
Where they just bought it, they put up a veneer, they didn't fix anything, and it's basically just to get it sold as quickly as possible, which is what's happening in the United States of America. All the predatory capitalism that we've all been experiencing for the past few decades, it is now coming into full fruition, right? And we see it, whether it's the White House, whether it's the presidency, whether it's just daily life. There's no denying anymore that something isn't working here. And I think that physical representation is incredibly powerful.
Let's talk about the huge amounts of wealth that's coming into the US, courtesy of Donald Trump's deals. A couple of weeks ago, it was $17 trillion worth. Now we're up to $22 trillion, and by midweek next week, it might be up to trillion dollars. I can't even comprehend these amounts. He is making up numbers, and these numbers are random, and he thinks, okay, passage of time has gone by. I said around 17 back on Monday. Now it's Friday, so I guess I can say 22 trillion. There is no paper trail for this stuff. There is no evidence of this stuff. He has put a listing on the White House website of these investments, and it doesn't say the dollar amount, but it lists what they are, and people have investigated these, and they're all made up. And in fact, some of these countries have come out and said, no, we never agreed to that. This is a fake announcement that he enjoys and relishes, and he thinks he's pulling the wool over people's eyes with this. But in reality, inflation is still up, and news this week is that electricity bills, since Trump took the White House, have already increased 11%. I've certainly seen that in mine. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at these healthcare bills that from January could potentially double. This notion of lying about the numbers, jobs numbers, inflation numbers, and income to the country can only go so long before the stock market starts to go, okay, this is, we're trading on kind of empty promises here.
Well, and I want to straddle a couple of things here because what you just brought up is essential in understanding what's going on. But I want to start with a personal story. A few years back, Anthony, I was having dinner at a restaurant, and the restaurant owner came over to talk to the table. Very gregarious type fellow, right? Very boisterous. Came over and started talking about how much money the restaurant was making, how successful it was. My God, you've never seen a restaurant work this well.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks later, the restaurant burned down under mysterious circumstances, right? America's that restaurant. Because what has actually happened, and Donald Trump, again, we should be very grateful that this is the avatar for it. Nothing right now in America is actually working. Everything is absolutely going down the tubes, and it's going down the tubes in an absolute hurry. You'll notice that Donald Trump lies about these numbers, just makes them up at random, because it basically makes him feel better. You brought up the stock market. We are currently balancing on maybe the largest stock market bubble that anyone has ever seen. Mm-hmm. And it's based on AI, a product that doesn't do what it's supposed to do, doesn't work the way it's been advertised to work. And meanwhile, the only reason that it could ever turn a profit, and it's not turning a profit, would be the mass layoffs of probably over 80 or 90% of all white-collar workers in the United States of America, which last time I checked, that would absolutely destroy the country in every possible way. So the alternative, and every one of these companies has been engaging, every tech company at this point has been engaging in a hot potato game, that the only thing that we've ever seen that looks like this was the environment prior to the 2008 stock market crash, right? So meanwhile, we hear, spending's up. No, it's only up among the top 10% of people in this country. Everybody else, debt is so saturated, which is something that happens before a stock market collapse. People, they're not able to get ahead. They put things on credit cards and they get loans and they refinance. Debt is completely saturated at this point. These jobs aren't real. They're not actually happening. Meanwhile, all of these corporations are laying people off and streamlining and making more money. Basically, what we're talking about right now is a restaurant that is completely and utterly underwater. It would take some serious work to make sure that the restaurant survived being underwater. And the people who are doing this, they're the ones who have the gas can and they're the ones that have the match. And by the way, the wealthy don't look at this like we do, because they'll survive a stock market crash. In fact, a stock market crash is beneficial because they can gobble up properties on the cheap. And if they face trouble, guess what, Anthony? I'm old enough to remember, you're old enough to remember, they'll be bailed out.
Sure.
And I can tell you right now, because they see AI as integral for national security, because they think that they're in an AI arms race with China, and that's the future of warfare, they're going to bail AI out. That's what's going to happen. Who's going to end up holding the bag? Who's going to be the person going to eat and finding the restaurant in ashes? You and me and everyone else. So what you're talking about, it is this strange, double, triple, multifaceted fake reality And they don't have to tell the truth. They don't have to be honest. No one's going to hold them accountable. There's no consequence for it. But what's actually occurred here is that we have criminals in charge of the government who are there to facilitate basically to rob the copper wiring out of the walls before the entire thing goes up in flames.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the assault on society in the form of immigration raids, and also the causes of the huge drop in tourism. I mean, I don't think Donald Trump realized that when you say that you're going to be frisked and have your phone confiscated at the airport, it might stop a few people from wanting to visit. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Jared Yates Sexton. I'm Anthony Davis. Jared, aside from people struggling to pay their bills, this kind of silent recession that we're currently in while Trump kind of celebrates being so rich, there is the other side of the coin, and that is that his private army, this kind of Gestapo-style snatching and grabbing, abducting and disappearing of people of color from the streets is underway, and it's ramping up. I mean, he's seeking to employ 10,000 additional troops. He's now combining the border force with ICE in terms of management, which is going to make things much scarier. This is obviously not just having the desired effect for him and his racist friends to kind of rid America of people of color, but it's having an effect on the rest of the world in terms of people who want to visit the United States. And in fact, several countries have issued travel warnings from their State Department saying that the US is not a safe place to visit. These two things, they seem entirely separate, but as I see it, they're also entirely connected and both contribute to the downfall of the American economy too. So there's a few things for you there to unpack, but maybe we should start with the private army.
Yeah, what's interesting about the private army, and one of the things I've had to do over the past decade, like when I first saw MAGA coming online, I said, this has the real potential to turn into a fascistic movement. And the reason wasn't because I had a crystal ball or I was like sorting through entrails, right? It was because it was obvious what the dots were that needed connected. I'll just say this, and because I've studied history and I've studied authoritarian regimes, it's really interesting that we have a private army and a secret police that has more money that, by the way, has been plundered from social programs.
Yeah.
And any sort of program that is supposed to help people or give people information. It's interesting that they took the money from those programs and put it into a private army, meanwhile, while the economy is being tanked. And what are they doing? They're aggressively recruiting people who aren't able to find jobs. So now we're talking about the possibility of mass layoffs. We're talking about a recession. And weirdly enough, you now have a private army and a secret police that is going to become one of the largest employers in the United States of America. And by the way, has an ideological allegiance to Donald Trump, MAGA, and a fascistic movement. I don't know. I've kind of seen something in history, but we used to call that the SA or the SS. That's what that is.
So it's the Nazification of American federal employment, effectively.
Exactly. So it's a jobs program for Nazis, is what it is. And by the way, people get this wrong all the time. They looked at, fascism and Nazism, and we were told a fairy tale, Anthony. We were told, oh, it was the rubes, right? It was the dumb, poor people who got hypnotized by the speeches, Anthony. They were unbelievable. Like, if you would have heard them, you would have been hypnotized too. And that's not actually the truth. Authoritarianism, where it takes over is where the middle and white collar class agrees to it. It's where they believe that the country has become too dangerous, where all of a sudden their economic incentives and their livelihoods are destroyed. Meanwhile, when there's a depression, right? And there's mass unemployment. And what Nazism, fascism, or MAGA offers at this point, it's a very simple thing. They offer you belonging. You have a group of people who feel the way that you do. Put on the armband, you'll have a bunch of friends. And by the way, a sense of empowerment, and also they will provide for you. Once they take over the funding apparatus of a country, they basically have, free reign to create an army of their own ownership. Meanwhile, what are they doing? They're going into cities, they're creating crimes, they're creating chaos, they're creating fear. Well, there's a side effect of this. People and this is abuse. I want to make it very clear that what this is abuse. It's terrorizing a nation. People will look around and they'll say, I'm so tired of this. Somebody needs to put order to this. And the authoritarian or the dictator, and by the way, what happens psychologically, we don't have time to get into all of it, but if you know your Freud, you know your psychoanalysis, there's a reason why Tucker Carlson calls Donald Trump daddy. There's a reason why they wear shirts that say daddy's home, is because they're looking for an authoritarian to put things to right. And if you look at the New York Times, which, you brought up Mamdani earlier, what was the article they published a few weeks ago? It was like, look at Portland. Do you want New York to be like Portland? This is what's going to happen. So they start psychologically aligning themselves with it. So we are both being conditioned to accept terror from the state, but also to see our lives through the chosen reality of the authoritarians. It's a psychological conditioning through constant abuse. And eventually what we get to is a private army and a secret police that is controlled, it is funded, and it is ideologically lashed to the authoritarian. So what we're in right now, we're in a fascist situation. We're in the consolidation of fascist components. And we're watching those things sort of being put into place and getting ready to go operational.
Well, one of Trump's wealthy friends just paid $130 million to pay the military, supposedly. I mean, that kind of came and went, and people didn't really kind of get too worried about it. And I literally I pulled all my hair out, Jared. I mean, this was this confirmed so many of our fears, and yet it wasn't enough controversy to really make much of the headlines.
Well, it is honestly, I was watching a thing the other day. I was back home. I had mentioned to you off mic that my hometown has been absolutely plundered. Yeah. And there was this mention on the news about a charitable donation, right, towards a library that needed it. And in truth, that's like a feel-good story. Oh, somebody took care of it. That's wonderful. A rich person handed out money to this. Meanwhile, what gets missed in all of it is this stuff shouldn't be happening in the first place.
Yeah.
There shouldn't need charitable donations. In fact, charities and charitable donations, the reason they happened was because in another period, like this period, during the Gilded Age, the wealthy realized they needed to start handing money out or else the pitchforks were coming out. It is a PR move. It's trying to sate people. And so I like you, I thought that was one of the most startling things I had seen in a while. One individual paid the United States military during the shutdown. That should bother everybody. One, that somebody could do that. Two, that it could possibly happen. And also, what type of a situation are we on where we're going to have the military the largest military in the history of the world, that's going to continue growing and growing and growing. Their budget will never decrease under a current regime or the status quo. No. Meanwhile, what are we talking about? We're talking about regular people not being able to afford their next meal. And
but we're in the richest country in the world, Jared. I mean, this we keep being told this is the richest, most successful country in the world. It's never been more successful, and yet people have never been poorer. And so, as you said earlier, there will come a point where Trump will, because he's branding himself as this kind of rich oligarch, desperate to kind of operate in these oligarchical circles, that he might do another stimulus check, which is how he bribed people during his first administration and waited till they could print his signature on the check. I mean, that is potentially what's coming here, just to keep people quiet.
Well, and look what has happened already. Disaster funds have been awarded based on places that voted for Donald Trump and which didn't. And I want to use a quick analogy because we're talking about very high concept things. We're talking about national politics. You'd mentioned earlier that I decoupled from academia. One of the things that I experienced was that there was a divide between the administrative class, your presidents, your provosts, your deans, all of that, and then the rest of us. And I'll tell you something that really opened my eyes and made me very aware of what was going on. Those people make all the money, right? When the money comes into the university, it's divided first among them, and then the scraps are handed to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And what happens year by year, Anthony? The people who are making all the money will come into a room and say, oh, things are really tight right now. We're going to have to get rid of this department. We're going to have to lay some people off. And unfortunately, some of you are going to have to, do more with less. That's a false binary. That's not how things actually work. And so as conditions worsen, there's a reason why immigrants have been scapegoated. There's a reason why black people have been scapegoated. There's a reason why women and gay and trans and poor people have been scapegoated. It's an intentional austerity. There's an intentional scarcity of things. We have more than enough right now. We could be fine if people would actually pay their fair share, if everything wasn't rigged in one direction, redistributing wealth towards the wealth class. But because of that, it's going to happen, and we're watching it with climate change. We have an existential crisis that's coming towards us.
Yes.
And if people think that ICE and borders and border enforcement is only going to be used against immigrants, they're dead wrong. It's going to happen to climate refugees. It's going to happen to economic refugees. Everything we're talking about is incremental. These people are going to have to do without, but everyone else will be fine. Well, these people are going to have to do without, and so on and so forth, until the only thing that is left are the people who already have more than enough and quite frankly, don't pay their fair share.
There's talk of the midterms that are approaching. There's some special elections before then in just a couple of days, but there's obviously the midterms next year and then the general in 2028. People are already talking about, or certainly exposing, how Donald Trump plans to rig these elections. Several ways that he might be doing that, not least going to war with Venezuela. And in fact, it's probably worth mentioning that the regime has identified targets in Venezuela now that include military facilities used to smuggle drugs. And if Trump, he's denied this week, he's kind of been denying, I'm not going to do this, but maybe I'm going to do this, which is how he responds often. But if he does decide to move forward with airstrikes, the targets would send a clear message to Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, that it's time to step down. So regime change is something that America maybe hasn't learned its lesson from with previous wars. I thought Trump was the no-war president, and he seems to have turned on his heels on that one. But there are other mechanisms as well that could potentially rig elections within the U.S. So going to war gives him the opportunity, as he did with Zelensky, you're at war and you're not having elections. Oh, okay, well, maybe I could do that, says the quiet part out loud. We've also got this redistricting and gerrymandering conversation to have. And then finally, his buddy just bought Dominion Voting Systems, which is responsible for 50% of the voting in the United States. So again, I always like to give you a trio of things to discuss, but these are major, major reasons why Trump could either cancel or rig elections.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought it up this way. I was doing an interview a couple of weeks ago, and somebody asked what I thought was going to happen in the midterms, and I said I reject that. Yeah. I can't tell you that there are going to be midterms. or that they're going to be free and fair. And the answer I always give when people ask me why, it's because he's already tried to steal an election.
Right.
What happened in the wake of 2020 was not just Donald Trump stamping his feet on January 6th. The thing that gets lost is how many Republican groups and individuals and actors were going into polling places, trying to get a hold of software and hardware and looking at it and trying to figure out what to do with it. And the next is psychological. Authoritarians are inherently anti-democratic. If they could not have elections or they could rig them, they would. And so if you actually take a look at what's happening, I brought up these think tanks and institutes because we do ourselves a disservice when we only go through the lens of Donald Trump. Yeah. Donald Trump is inherently a fascist. He instinctually acts as a fascist. He is a buffoon and unserious. The people behind him are very serious. And the problem is that 24 hours a day, wealth class money is going into these think tanks and institutes trying to figure out literally how to dismantle democracy. So you just brought up a couple of possibilities. We've got war, which, by the way, the Venezuela thing, it looks like it's going to happen. We also have the possibility of a burgeoning world war that is a variety of reasons that we could talk about, but it's complicated. We also have ICE as a secret police and an intimidation force. And by the way, maybe I'm the only one who's noticing this. They're going to Democratic strongholds. Yes. They're going to cities that are either led by Democrats or are, most broadly populated by Democrats. It is sort of a sideways cultural revolutionary reactionary force. So all of a sudden we're talking about the possibility of these being occupied cities during an election. I have questions about that. And then you get into the technology of it. And also just anecdotally, this is not a regime that is acting like it's worried about elections.
No.
Nothing.
Well, he said the words, though, hasn't he? He said, I don't need your votes. I got plenty of votes. So, you have to take him at his word because he has no inner monologue. He said you only need to vote this one time and you'll never have to vote again, referring to the 2024 election. He is not leaving that White House with his, you don't build an extension knowing that you're going to have to give it up to the next buyer.
Well, no, and on top of that, everything from the Qatari jet, the hundreds of millions of dollar bribe from Qatar, like on top of that, you brought up what he says. Everybody wants to play these games. And you know what it reminds me of, Anthony? It reminds me of an abusive family. It reminds me of where you have an abusive patriarch who says things, and then afterwards, the people who are being abused, someone says, oh, I don't think he really meant it.
Right.
And all you have to do is listen to him. How often does he talk about running for a third term? How often does he talk about elections not actually being held or being manipulated? We're working on that. There's a plan for it. Listen to him. And all of this is to say, and I want to make a point because I think we're at the point in this conversation where this needs to be said. We can't keep looking at the next midterm. We can't keep looking at the next presidential election. Voting is only the most minuscule part of a democracy. You have to be engaged. We can't keep waiting on a savior to show up, a messiah to show up. Barack Obama is not walking through that door, right? Like it's not going to be set right because the Democratic Party does the right thing or a court or an investigation or an institution holds. We're going to have to do the hard work ourselves. And that's the only thing that has been shown to actually be something that holds back an authoritarian takeover. We cannot take these elections for granted. We only have so much time. So much of this apparatus is coming online. We cannot just sit and wait around for November 26 or November 28. We can't do that.
Authoritarian countries with dictators, they like to have elections. Sure. Because it gives because they win, and it gives them legitimacy. And Putin's done this for the last 24 years almost. He worked out how he could just keep on winning, and so he continues to rule. Trump looks up to these people. These are the people that he wants to associate with. Meanwhile, our kind of allies in democracy, he ignores and turns a blind eye to, and hence Europe and Canada now are having to kind of create their own coalitions, both militarily and domestically too. This is a shift of the world order, and I know whenever we say world order out loud or put it in the title of any of these videos, YouTube flags it and puts a little disclaimer saying that world order is like a conspiracy. Can we just talk to that for a moment? Because, the world order has changed. Trump is responsible for that. And it's becoming increasingly clear to people that they might have to change that kind of Wikipedia reference.
Yeah, I would push back on one thing, is the idea that Donald Trump created it.
Okay.
I think that Donald Trump is...
He's a pawn in the game.
Yeah, it's hard to say this, but I try and say it all the time this way, which is Donald Trump is a symptom of a larger disease.
Yeah.
And we look at history through like the great man theory, that like one individual is the one who does this, when in fact, if Donald Trump didn't exist, this moment of capitalist fascistic necessity would have created Donald Trump. We would be talking about a Josh Hawley. We'd be talking about a Tom Cotton. Somebody somehow would have metastasized this. And so what we're actually talking about is, and in history, there are these moments, I don't mean to pick on the United Kingdom, but for people who aren't aware, Britain used to be the most powerful country in the world. It used to be a giant empire. And eventually, at some point, let's just say during the 20th century, sometime around the middle of it, the flagging British Empire, it lost its gravity and control over the situation, and an upstart, let's say, I don't know, Germany, tried to change the paradigm because it saw an opening to try and establish itself as the holder of power in the world. It's this gravity that like strengthens and releases. The American empire is in decline. And the American order, which basically has been held together by neoliberal globalism, which is capitalism, which has got us to this point, capitalism is a parasite. It jumped from the United Kingdom to the United States at the end of World War II. And it was negotiated. You brought up earlier the social safety net within Great Britain. That was sort of the participation trophy.
Yes.
Oh, thank you for passing over the baton over to the United States of America. You now, for a little while, have health care, right? And the United States of America will take over the construction of a larger project, which turned into neoliberal globalism. Well, the parasite got fat on the host. And what did we see during the War on Terror? We saw a literal worldwide war that was carried out by the United States, not to benefit the United States of America, but to benefit private interest and neoliberal globalism. So eventually, at some point, capitalism as a parasite, it looks to go elsewhere. I don't know that it takes an expert to say, we know where it's going next. It's going to China. And as it goes to China and America, I don't think people have wrestled with this. We're Americanizing Chinese capitalistic authoritarianism. We're taking on their surveillance. We're taking on their oppression. We're taking on these favored corporations that work with the state. And by the way, you brought up Russia. We're borrowing a sprinkle of illiberal democracy and Putinism and bringing that in. So what's occurring right now is that we have reached an epochal moment where the American order is flagging and another order is working to take its place. That doesn't mean it's inevitable, but we're watching the self-destruction of America and that liberal order that it didn't hold peace, but it exploited people around the world. It forwarded this political project. We're watching that start to change into something else. And it just so happens that we have one of the most destructive, venal, self-dealing, incompetent people. And it's not a surprise that we have that. That's the perfect person to lead the United States as it goes into decline.
Do you think Americans have been brainwashed into thinking that China is rudimentary in some way and doesn't kind of have the skill and the power that it does? Because Trump's always talked about these shithole countries, and that's basically any country that's not majority white in his view. But China is a powerhouse, and aside from their human rights atrocities, I mean, I think the US now could probably compete in that area too. But it is, what's coming out of China is not least incredible. I mean, they have cars that make Tesla look like Tonka toys. And this is a shift that I don't think Trump or Americans generally are really ready for. We've been buying their cheap components and bits and pieces, but now they are leading the way, even in aviation. And it's massive. I mean, Trump just supposedly agreed a deal with Xi Jinping this week, and if he hadn't have touched the tariffs in the first place, the deal that we had under Joe Biden is a better deal, and he kind of screws things up and then claims he's come in to fix them, and then there's a whole kind of hurrah and photo opportunity, and he got his photo. I mean, that's what he was really looking for, that photo with him and the leader of China. Again, so he can play at this very senior executive level that he's so thrilled to be in, because he only ever played one on TV. I think maybe he's finally got to be the real thing. So talk to me about the future with China as the dominating nation in this order.
I thought what you said was very interesting, because the only term that comes to mind is, I'm going to coin it now, which is the idea of American supremacy, which is a combination of poisonous nationalism and white supremacy.
Yeah.
And if you actually trace the history of this, the death knell of the American order was signed when they brought China into this liberalized neoliberal trading organization. And if you go back and look at the documents and speeches and conversations, they literally thought that by bringing China in as a labor force and exploiting them, that we were going to make them more liberal. We were going to make them more democratic. And China was like, oh, fantastic. We're going to create an incredible amount of wealth and influence and leverage here. And what happened to us, Anthony, and this is, and we've been talking about politics. I want to talk very quickly about the psychological and spiritual side effects of that. We became addicted to cheap goods. We became addicted to instant gratification, and we became basically, we traded over morality and ethics and leadership for just cheap plastic baubles and luxuries. And basically at this point, the United States of America has become more of a consumer center than anything even remotely a leadership nation, right? And if you take a look at where this thing is going, these things never happened peacefully. They never, it's not like Great Britain was like, let's hold a ceremony and we're going to hand capitalism over to the United States of America. You had a species-defining world war that could have led us into the darkness of permanent totalitarianism, right? And I think unless we change things and unless we move off the system that we have, we're heading towards a massive conflict. And again, you've got climate change over here looming like a haunting spectacle. Right. And there's a reason. You brought up Venezuela. There's a reason why Russia invaded Ukraine when it did. There's a reason why you're seeing all these countries starting to invade others and take things over. The United States is probably going to invade Venezuela, not because of drugs. It's because of oil. Because it's a game of like trying to bring together as many resources as you can. They see almost that there's a storm coming, and they need to go loot and steal as many resources as they possibly can to be ready when the starting gun goes off. And so what we're talking about now is a cycle of self-destruction and the eradication of democracy and liberal democracy in general. And people haven't wrapped their heads around that. They truly think that we can get back to 2015, right? And they really think that we can get back to something that approaches normal. Normal doesn't exist anymore. That normal didn't work in the first place. We have to figure out an alternative to all of this, because what we're describing is suicidal. It is literally self-destructive, and it will lead to untold amounts of suffering. That doesn't mean that you hand this over to China. It doesn't mean that you become more like China. It means that we need to get off of this system that is taking us in this direction, and we have to figure something else out.
Bernie was right. That's
in
all I'm going to say.
Yes,
right?
In some things.
Well, the reason I say that is because as you're saying these things, I'm thinking that this plan that Mamdani has for New York, socialized grocery stores and things like this, childcare and real things for real people to give them the chance to actually to work, things that Bernie Sanders has kind of been advocating for 40 odd years. These things are maybe the back to basics policies that America needs as the antidote to rampant capitalism. And because I want us to look for some solutions in the short term. It's very easy for us to talk about, what we witness and the collapse of American systems and society. But what comes next, and I actually care less about who leads that charge and more about what the component parts are to take us back to a place of civility. It's not the pendulum swinging back, as you say, to pre-Donald Trump. Those days are over. The world and America is very different now.
Yep.
But what rises from the ashes?
Well, and Anthony, you're the best, and I love talking to you. Because that is exactly the thing. Because we don't know who's going to lead this. We don't know. Like when the progressives started in the early 20th century, they had another situation like this, right? When what would become the New Deal coalition started leading into the Great Depression and then after, they didn't know that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was going to come to prominence and become a class traitor. They had no idea, right? So I look at that and I say, what were those people fighting for? And it's very apparent what we deserve in this country. I'm not talking, if we say, oh, this is the utopia that we need to head for, we'll never get there. That's impossible, right? It takes asking for very achievable, recognizable things. And I think one of the things that this authoritarian regime and this venal group of people makes obvious for us, we have to ask, do we want to be like those people? No. We want to be the opposite of those people, right? They're never happy with what they have. They don't take care of others. The only satisfaction they get is in abusing people and crushing people. We have to come together. In this country, and I don't want to get into the weeds too far in this, this is a lonely country. This is an atomized, unwell country. You don't get fascism in a healthy country. It feeds on corruption and suffering and depression. There's a reason why the numbers show that we are historically depressed and historically lonely and historically anxious. So we have to reform community. We have to come together, get to know each other once again, and realize our common sort of interdependence. As we do that, you need to ask yourself, what do we deserve? Okay, so we're the richest nation in the world, supposedly. Why don't we have health care? Why is it that if you get sick in this country, even if you have health insurance, it will ruin you financially? Why can't you buy a house anymore, right? And by the way, the answer is private equity has gobbled all this stuff up, right? Why is it that people are becoming radicalized and becoming fascistic? Oh, maybe we need to regulate tech. Maybe it shouldn't be predatory. Maybe it shouldn't incentivize radicalization. And then why can't we pay for the things that we deserve? Because the wealthy aren't paying their fair share and they've rigged and bought the system. So we need to rein that stuff in. Everything else, like for me, the guiding sort of horizon for me, going back to FDR, is his second Bill of Rights that he was starting to talk about before he died. And what he was talking about was a new Bill of Rights that said you should have shelter. You should have education. You should have food. You should have a good paying job. And a healthy society works that way. The government should make sure that people aren't predators against you, that people aren't rigging the system. So we're talking about anti-corruption. We're talking about expanding our rights, freedoms, and liberties, and also making a society that actually works. That's the antidote to fascism. It's not like whatever the Democratic Party is trying to peddle at this point. And it's so obvious that that's what people want. They want to believe in something and they want to go in a direction that reinstills their hope for the future and gives them a new direction and a new future, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why Barack Obama was so successful. He was able to articulate. And by the way, Anthony, I try and bring this up every time. I come from the state of Indiana. Indiana was under the control of the Ku Klux Klan during the 20th century. I mean, literally under their control. Barack Hussein Obama II won Indiana in 2008.
It can be done.
It can be done. So what we're talking about is determining the antidote to what it is we're dealing with and also determining what it is that we deserve. And we need to remember that we deserve better. And it's a healing process and it's a reformation process. And we can do it, but we can't do it by just waiting and waiting and waiting and hoping someone will fix it for us.
It's the people that will make America great again, clearly.
The people will. And this regime could be brought to its knees tomorrow.
Yeah, it only takes 3.5%, apparently.
That's all that needs to happen. And it's terrifying, and they create more terrifying circumstances. But if we can get over our fear of the unknown, we can have everything that we've ever wanted and everything that we've deserved. We just have to take that step.
We have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you for joining us. Jared Yates Sexton, thanks for being on The Weekend Show.
Thank you, my friend.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.